everyone. We are Group 3, and we are going to be presenting our program evaluation, which was evaluating Wheatland Middle School's attendance interventions and to evaluate how effective they are for students with high truancy issues. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Evaluation my group and I decided on was formative evaluation. Formative evaluation is usually used to adjust and enhance interventions while they're being implemented. Its overall use is to look at the process, identify any problems, and for it to be used as a guide for adjustments to a program. It is important to note that it is not used for final outcomes or for proving that a program needs funding. It focuses on acquiring useful information, and it does not rely on specific methodologies. A reason why our group decided on this formative evaluation was because we wanted to see how effective the current interventions are for students' attendance at Wheatland Middle School, and to identify any problem areas, and also looking into how we can improve those problem areas if needed.
For this project, our evaluation was different from a lot of others. Instead of looking at just one part of the attendance system, we evaluated all three tiers together to see how the whole process worked. Our results were based on real attendance data taken directly from student records, not surveys or opinions. So, what we found reflects actual student behavior. We also used pre and post test comparisons with paired t-tests, and that allowed us to measure attendance before and after each intervention in a clear, objective way. And another thing that made our evaluation unique is that we didn't just look at the school as a whole. We looked at different groups like ELL, special education, and flexible instruction time to see if certain students were impacted differently. So overall, this was a formative evaluation, which means the goal wasn't to blame or judge. The purpose was to figure out what's working and what isn't, and how the attendance system can improve moving forward.
Wheatland Middle School, part of the school district of Lancaster, serves students in grades 6 through 8. The school principal and the leadership team work to create a positive and supportive environment for students and families. However, like many middle schools, Wheatland continues to face challenges with students absent. The attendance challenge in 2024, Wheatland's attendance rate dropped to 86.4%, which is concerning because chronic absence is strongly linked to academic struggles, higher dropout risk, and poor long-term life and health outcomes. Research shows that when students miss school frequently, their chances of failing behind increase. The current interventions to address this issue, Wheatland use a tier attendance intervention system that is activated when the students reach 6 unlawful absence. These interventions include enforcing attendance policies, educating families about the importance of attendance, and identifying barriers that keep students from attending regularly. The purpose of formative evaluation aims to evaluate how these attendance interventions are being implemented and how effective they are. The goal is to understand what is working, what challenge remains, and what improvement can strengthen the system moving forward. Through this evaluation, we hope to support Wheatland Middle School in increasing attendance, improving students' outcomes, and ensuring that all students have the best opportunity to success.
This evaluation examines whether the school's full multi-tiered attendance system is working as intended. Instead of focusing on one strategy, it looks at how all tiers collectively influence attendance. The evaluation also supports district policy alignment and continuous improvement. So for our first objective, we wanted to measure interventions effectiveness. With this, we assessed how each tiered intervention improved student attendance. We compared this by using pre and post intervention attendance data, and then we used statistical analysis, specifically a t-test, to identify significant changes. Our second evaluation, which was to evaluate outcomes across student groups, involved examining effectiveness by grade levels 6 through 8, accessing differences among subgroups, including ELL, SPED, and FIT students, and then identifying which student populations benefited the most or showed limited progress. Lastly, when we wanted to develop data-driven recommendations, this section included identifying strengths and areas needing improvement in the current interventions, informing future policy, staff training, and student support strategies, and ensuring interventions effectively support diverse learners and reduce chronic absences.
Let's start with what the numbers tell us. We analyze attendance data from 70 middle school students who participate in one or more tier interventions, from attendance improvement contract to course citations. When comparing attendance before and after interventions, we found something unexpected. There was no significant improvement across any of the groups. In fact, some students' attendance actually declined. The results were consistent. All p-values were about 0.05, meaning the changes were statistically significant. The finding challenged the assumption that the current interventions are truly making an impact. But that is only half the story. The real question is why these strategies didn't work. The data suggests one clear theme: timing and approach matter. Many interventions began late, often after students had already accumulated high absences, leaving little room for changes. More importantly, these interventions were designated to enforce attendance, not to understand it. They didn't address root causes like transportation issues, mental health challenges, or family instability. Even when comparing students in the Family in Transition program to others, we saw no significant differences. That tells us the problem isn't the students, it is the system. So, what's next? The findings called for early, more supported interventions that focus on relationships, not punishments. Because when we connect before we correct, that's when the real attendance change begins. The takeaway is simple: to change attendance, we must first change our approach. And so we will talk about the different recommendations.
With the data that we have evaluated, we have come up with 6 recommendations for Wheatland Middle School. The first recommendation would be to shift from reacting after 6 absences to identifying concerns after just a few, and using real-time data to flag patterns and reach out to families early on. We also think it's important to prioritize relationships and student support, move away from punitive approaches, build belonging through mentoring, advisory groups, and restorative practices with counselors and social workers leading the support. It's important to strengthen family and community partnerships, work closely with families and connect them to community resources, improve outreach through home visits, flexible meeting times, and translation services. Fully implement all 3 tiers, ensure Tier 1 prevention, Tier 2 targeted support, and Tier 3 intensive interventions are all in place and applied consistently. Use data to guide decision making. Adopt ongoing monitoring, dashboards, and program reviews to adjust interventions and ensure continuous improvement. And then lastly, align with district policy and ethical standards. focus on restorative, strength-based practices that engage students rather than punish them.
What my group found interesting was that none of the interventions seemed to improve attendance. If we did an intervention in the beginning of the school year, it didn't seem to make it worse, but it didn't seem to make it better either. And then when they put interventions the second half of the school year, it didn't seem to do anything, but putting in the beginning of the school year seemed to at least be the best option if you would put intervention in. Another thing we found interesting was that the school doesn't seem to try to change interventions to improve attendance. I'm not sure if they look at the data of whether these programs or interventions work or not, but they don't seem to try to change them to see if others would improve.